session, is that right? All right. All right, call to order work session of the Planning Commission. And our first topic is a discussion on Northwest Superior Plan update. So, Stephen, do you have anything to start off with?
Turn it over to Darcy.
All right, all you. We're excited.
Good evening, everyone. So we, this is our final meeting with Planning Commission. So we, you received the draft report that we've spent the last 6 weeks or so just trying to kind of pull all the pieces together that we've been working on with you. So that's, a draft. We're open to feedback to, see if there's anything we need to refine or, add to based on your thoughts. But what we did want to do was we've put together what we're calling kind of a working draft presentation for the town board meeting next month. And if it works for you all, we could kind of breeze through that and maybe circle back on any comments, but wanted to make sure, level of detail, just kind of the points that we, are thinking we need to touch on make sense to you and have a chance to refine that. Does that work in terms of strategy? Okay. And, given you all have heard all of this many, many times at this point, our approach was going to be just to kind of do more of a high level walkthrough. So Matt and Chania and I will, let me try to zoom out here a little bit. This feels very large.
Clarification, I guess I'd add is that there are some, right, you guys are super familiar with this, and the board knows throughout, so just think about that as Darcy's presenting and making sure that you feel like whatever message you need to get across the board to make a decision, is captured, I guess. So.
And will the presentation to the board be in a
It's going to be in a work session.
In a work session format? Okay.
So
okay.
you guys are all invited.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah.
And it'll be more informal than a meeting, but sit around the table and have a presentation and have a discussion. And I think I'll confirm, but I think that work session is slated to start in February.
Okay. Excellent.
And then this will be something that they formally adopt through resolution later, or what?
That's a good question.
Is this?
If they need to take action on it, we'll get it on an agenda item.
Okay.
So I think it's probably just for discussion and whether or not there's any feedback, and then making a separate meeting in order to take action.
Okay.
Similar to the wellness that I have in our agenda for tonight. We discuss something and we have to do something separate in order to take action on it. So,
Right.
I don't want to presume anything either. So
No, I think a work session's good. Okay. Okay.
Sorry.
No, thank you. Okay, so, and just to give you guys a little bit of context, we spent a fair bit of time, you recall, I'm sure, going through and kind of refining the presentation for the town board update we did in September. So we went back to that since that was kind of a synopsis and tried to just focus on updates to that and, a little bit of expansion here or there, since that level of detail seemed to work pretty well for that structure. So just kind of framing up what we hope to get out of that meeting, kind of talk about what the commission's recommendations are, opportunities for clarification. And then for each of the areas, we'll talk about a little bit of context and then hone in on those recommendations. So we've made some updates in terms of the process. You are familiar with that. We added in just the additional meetings that were done since we last met with them, and then additional meetings with you, and then, keeping the guiding principles high level, and then, let me just kind of blow through this pretty quick and then we can circle back.
Yeah, I have one point I was going to make.
Okay, why don't you hop up then? All right.
So yeah, we kind of went over with the town board the last time too, but one thing to note is I did kind of dig into the amount of sales tax that's being generated by the marketplace, and kind of understanding what level of retail. I was thinking originally that we would kind of recommend a level of retail you would need to maintain, and what I found is that the anchor tenants there produce so much of the sales tax revenue that goes in there that they are really the key, and that the surrounding retail helps, but it's not as important. And so really that focus on the three big anchors there, I think should continue to be the focus, and then allowing the rest to evolve with it always sort of being a retail center, but evolving to match market trends and things like that we've talked about, I think is the focus, instead of trying to specify a limit, but just focusing on Target, Costco, and Whole Foods as being really the key importance, and making sure that they're strong and they're driving additional demand for other retail is the key. I don't know if there's anything else other than that to.
So that, I mean, just to tie that to the options then, the ranges of new retail, it sounds like what Cheney kind of came up with, is, if I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly, is that's less critical. It's just in terms of the big guys.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, really our objectives are to keep them strong, drive more traffic to the center, and configure the center in a way that functions better. I mean, in essence. So.
Can I ask a curiosity question?
Sure.
The other stores that are next to Target or between Target and Costco, like Michael's and TJ Maxx and Ulta, do they do well or not?
I mean, I think most of the center does about average for those type of tenants. Maybe, I mean, none of them are high-performing stores, I would say. I think from what we heard, the threats to some of the junior anchors, like the Office Max, the PetSmart, are more just the shifts of those tenants nationally. And so you have a store that's in not a great look. It's a sort of middle performing store, and they're changing their national program that might put some of those tenants at risk. But yeah, I mean, generally, what we heard and what we can tell from the numbers, it's sort of an average performance, kind of the junior anchors and the anchors, and then the inline is the smaller spaces are the ones that have really struggled, and we've talked about the reasons related to that.
So I guess I have a follow-up question. So if we're talking about the middle or midline anchors, the mid-sized stores, which would probably be Office Max and PetSmart, right? Right. Not, it's more of a national thing. We probably can't control how that plays out, but that seems to, I guess, in a more positive light, it seems like that gives us some flexibility to do something different there or to be prepared to do something different there should those tenants go away. We don't necessarily, if I'm hearing you correctly, need to fill that with retail space, because the retail that carries that site is already being accommodated by the three major tenants. So if our focus is on that, and then we take it as additional flexibility to either add housing or office space or something like that in those locations, is that a fair assessment? And
yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the opportunity and flexibility that is presented provides the opportunity to create better located and performing space, hopefully. And then also, I think you hit it on the head in that looking at refill. I mean, I think the example of the refill of the Sports Authority box is a pretty clear indication of what will happen. If you lose an anchor like that, you might be able to refill it with some, but in the end of the day, I mean, you got a decent use in terms of the swim school, but that doesn't produce much retail sales tax. And so it's not totally different than another use altogether. And so what you're going to see is, as you're losing some of these tenants, perhaps trying to refill them continually will be a struggle. And so that flexibility that you talked about, I think it creates the opportunity to do something different or try to create some vitality.
and address some of the stuff that Cheney's identified
Yes.
in terms of a planning, like site design wise.
Right.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Have you thought about, and I don't know that we've talked about this much, but the impact of downtown Superior, the new town center, on trying to, if these mid-market or lower leave, whether they would try to go across the street versus here, or is there not space in the town center for that type of retail?
I think generally the objective and the goal is to try to create, the marketplace is more of a national oriented kind of, chain tenant, and what they're kind of striving for in downtown is more local boutiques, kind of higher end. But there is a chance, I'm not sure that they'll necessarily pull tenants from the two centers, but there's a chance that there are tenants that might be considering both sites at some point. And I think that's possible. And so I think part of what we're trying to do in this is iterate that we're not trying to compete in terms of creating the same environments and the exact same product in both sites. And that this is still very much although we'd like it to be more accessible and more urban, it's still a destination regional center where people are driving to a lot, and that the major tenants there still need folks for it to function like a shopping center, and not necessarily as a downtown. But the opportunity to add some placemaking and gathering stuff to bolster it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, because it got me thinking about, it's tough enough with retail, and if we're gonna compete against
Yeah.
opposite sides of the street here, that we're doing ourselves a disservice.
Right, yeah, so.
Okay, so moving through the concepts for the marketplace, we start with the big ideas. This came from original input from before this process, what the community really wanted, and in our assessment of it. So the big ideas were enhancing connectivity, really leveraging the BRT station, and we heard that people want to walk and bike to the center, but there are too many barriers, so trying to make that easier. Matt touched on this. I don't think I need to spend time on it. Basically, you know, the long-term success depends on those big boxes, so let's keep them healthy and happy. Experience and placemaking, and this is happening nationally. You guys are familiar with this. We looked at some case studies regionally that have put in placemaking, and from that have seen success in their retail market. And then really creating the identity. We come up with, you know, the final two options there on the diagrams below show two different ways of spinning the kind of big ideas, but it's creating these neighborhoods basically, and creating maybe a new logo and identity about the place. Mm-hmm.
And I did have just a note on this slide. I did have a note on this slide that, I mean, some of the maps are so clear as to what the options look like, and these color codes are different. They're relatively different. I mean, I think we see what you're getting across, but some of the other maps that kind of, you know, show the roads
Mm-hmm.
in these different options, and I don't know if laying the color code over those just for consistency right across the drawings for these option roads, Center Drive versus Marshall Road. It just threw me a little bit. It's feedback comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these read well. These are easy.
No,
to understand.
I think
you
these.
like the other.
I like the other. I like the other
Okay.
ones better. I like the maps on. I don't
Yeah.
know what pages they're on, but.
Okay.
And if you laid this color code just over top of them, you know, a little opaque, so you can see the.
To connect the two.
Just so it's the same drawings throughout the
Yep.
document. That was my only thought.
Okay. Okay. So then we go through the options that we explored over the process, starting with the original three. Then we went to the community, got feedback, we refined those, we did the traffic study, and that culminated in these final two options that we're still bringing up to the level of consideration. Option one being a focus along Center Drive. So really Marshall Road is, you know, maybe modified a bit, but could still function as it does today, could still be a CDOT right-of-way or a city. There's the option there, and we'll get to that a little later. But basically just fixing up the infrastructure that you have to work better, and then really focusing along Center Drive and pulling some of the momentum there. Where option two really starts to reconfigure the grid and get more of a grid in there for long-term sustainability for the center. So having the flexibility to transform over time, creating those blocks that can do that. And the focus about the place is along a newly designed Marshall Road that is not a CDOT right-of-way, and that the major traffic is rerouted along Fifth.
One quick thing, I like all this. I couldn't visualize exactly in your point number 5 about the bus stop. It's on page 19 of the draft plan. I couldn't visualize exactly where you're kind of proposing to reroute folks there, or so maybe even just like an icon on the map, like, you know, potential bus circulation or something. That just wasn't clear to me. I couldn't visualize how that came together.
Okay, so then we pulled together a comparison of these two. Everything highlighted in blue is where they're very similar. That is, the enhanced signage and branding, wayfinding, improved pedestrian bicycle connectivity, mix of uses, additional access to the center. Those are all very similar throughout. The central gathering space changes. So along Center Drive, it's really anchored at the terminus of Center Drive adjacent to the BRT, whereas in the other one, it's along Marshall Drive where the activity is focused. Circulation and connectivity. Let's see, the second one, providing that formal grid for long-term flexibility. Roundabout at 5th and Center, we say it may need to be removed in option 1 because the focus is on Center Drive. And I just drove through there on my way here, and it really is a visual barrier to those retailers there. So I think especially in that concept, it would be beneficial to reconfigure that intersection. New roundabout at 5th and Marshall. No, obviously in the first option, we're keeping Marshall Road more or less as it functions today, skinning it up. But it is a new roundabout there on the second option. Marshall Road devolution, which means CDOT taking over ownership and maintenance of Marshall Road from CDOT. In the first option, not necessary. And the second one, it is. Construction disruption, moderate on the first to potentially significant on the second. Redevelopment opportunity, just about where, again, Center Drive versus Marshall Road. And then long-term flexibility. We feel like over time, the second one does give you more flexibility in creating more of a street grid and blocks if retail, doesn't disappear, but completely changes the face of things, and the market is more about residential. We feel like that creating the grid really sets you up in a better place for that. And then distinctions from downtown Superior, to your point, Steve, this is, the plaza is an open space, whereas in the Superior Marketplace, we're looking at smaller scale, maybe a series of them scattered throughout, whereas downtown Superior is a very large civic plaza. Retail here in the center, we're looking at still more of the chains or chainlets, recognizable retailers that are well-known, and people actually are driving there to get to them, or hopefully taking transit sometimes. And then the downtown being more of that boutique. Architecture can also be different. We want to create a unique identity there with any new architecture that comes in, but maybe with some specific standards and overlay. Housing, we think, Superior Marketplace would demand more of a for rent, kind of multifamily, whereas downtown Superior is looking at more diverse uses or types. And then transit orientation, we're excited that the BRT, you have right there at the center, and so it really is transit oriented, whereas downtown Superior is transit supportive. What we call transit supportive, it can be served by transit, but it's not the primary driver for development. And so we wanted to outline those differences and make sure that we address the uniqueness of the Superior Marketplace. And I think
excuse me. And so when we went back to the business community, we sort of laid out the various levels of investment. And so the different investments or actions that the town could take on the lesser level in terms of time and money are on the top, and greater investment on the bottom, and just showing sort of the realm of those in terms of level investment for the town. And then we laid out sort of the action paths or the phasing for both, and they're pretty similar, whether the town is the driver or it's in a partnership with the Brixmore property owner and other property owners in the center. So the common actions are, being proactive in modifying the zoning and the development agreement to allow for the uses that you want, providing some limits on development related to that, that modification of the development agreement, you can start the conversations with CDOT about the devolution process, and potentially implementing signage and branding improvements. So starting to sort of build that idea of the two separate centers and a center. And those improvements can occur or can help the center before and after any changes are made. So that's the thought. And then in terms of where the paths split, it really kind of depends on whether or not it's a partnership or not. And so if it is a partnership, it's really working with the owner to create a redevelopment plan, ensuring that the priority improvements that we've identified, like the plazas, the different access and circulation improvements, the Marshall Road treatment, are included in that plan, and then working with them to find a joint path forward in terms of funding those placemaking and access improvements. And our thought thinking that the tools or the way that you fund those things are slightly different. In the partnership, you're using your different incentives to help them kind of carry the load on that. Using different, perhaps looking at sales tax sharing or the continuation of urban renewal or those sort of tools. In terms of the town initiated path, it shifts the focus to starting near the BRT station and working with RTD and potentially the adjacent property owners there to to attract some development on that site. And exploring potential acquisition or lease of parcels to help facilitate the transition of parking, temporary parking solutions to allow for development to occur next to the station. And then figuring out how the town can start to fund some of those access and placemaking improvements, whether they be in individual development projects or in town funded projects through capital funds. So that's sort of the split of paths. Any questions related to that? Yeah.
I know you don't have a crystal ball. I'm just wondering, kind of from an urgency perspective or priority perspective, what do you see as the trajectory of the market path, the market we have? I know it's a crystal ball question, but.
In terms of how quickly you need to move?
Yeah, or just how happy you think our major anchors are going to remain.
I think for, at least in the short term, that they seem stable. And I mean, I think that's the comment about this kind of trade area or submarket here is that it's fairly stable. It's not growing a ton. And so there isn't a ton of new opportunity. It's a bit concerning to see, we're hearing things about anchors in Louisville moving out to Lafayette, Kohl's, and then potentially some other ones. And so that really highlights sort of the market trends. Some of those retailers are moving to better located sites that are near more growth. But for those bigger anchors, I don't think that's necessarily something they're looking at. And so I don't think there's like a huge urgency, I would say. But I think that you guys are doing the right thing in terms of being proactive about exploring these and being open to changes and trying to find some flexible solutions, whereas some of your neighbors or other folks in the region or in the metro area have waited until those vacancies cropped up to take action, and they're sort of behind the eight ball. And so I think that's good. Also, from what we've heard is that there might be some interest from the property owner, and so they're kind of seeing the need to help invest in it too. So I think you're on the right path. And so, yeah.
So,
And when we talk about downtown Superior, a lot of the focus has been got to get people there. So we haven't talked much about that, the residential component and whether that's early on in this process and getting more people in this area, or, is it a focus on getting the infrastructure changed? And could you just maybe speak to that a little bit? How important is that? Where should it fall in implementation and phasing?
Yeah. I mean, I think it kind of depends. I mean, a little bit on the path, or, whether there's, but I think if we go back there's some things that you can do prior to really trying to get the development there. So I think working on allowing for a flexibility use, doing the amendment to the PUD and rezoning, working to figure out a path forward for a signage plan and some better branding and wayfinding. And that could be done in conjunction with the property owner, whether they want to redevelop or not. And some of these access improvements, I think those can all occur prior to necessarily needing development. I think what the thing is related to housing is that it's the most likely use to lead to redevelopment in there. And so any sort of major development that's likely to occur that's different than what you have now, sort of pad site development is likely to be that kind of use. And so I think that's just that recognition. I think if you're going down path 2 and we don't have a big partnership for a big grand project, it's gonna take some time to, work out some things with RTD, figure out the logistics in terms of how you can create a site that's flexible enough to allow for some parking to be moved to attract the developer. Because I think what we found from RTD is they had somebody propose a joint development project on their site, but the barrier to it was paying for the structured parking that they need for RTD's uses. The use alone, the multifamily project would likely to be feasible. But they can't cover the cost of 300 parking spots. And so if there's other solutions to parking RTD, whether that's simply or temporary or permanent, that kind of reduces that barrier. And so I think what bringing in that development does is it starts to open opportunities for additional interest, and then those investments can help fund or catalyze some other infrastructure investments that allow to create some more opportunities for more additional phases, if you will, or implementing some of the things on Center Drive that we're talking about in that concept. Does that make sense?
Yep.
I would also add the initiative, it's in the first.
Cheney, could you come up? Sorry.
Is starting conversations with CDOT. Marshall Road is a huge barrier, and even if there was a multifamily project to come in there, I feel like it would feel very isolated. It would feel like it's plopped down in the middle of a retail center. You really need to start creating those pedestrian scale places, and start with Marshall Road would be my.
And our developers, we bring them in, they've got a blank slate, right? Prairie dog fields and entire infrastructure is built. Will developers come in and assist with, part of the infrastructure changes that we need to make, or is it more important for us to get the infrastructure changes done? Obviously we have to plan and allow and permit, but is this a big enough site that a developer may come in and help fund some of the infrastructure changes?
I think the lower hanging fruit are the less expensive sort of improvements. Perhaps there's a small plaza that's included in a project because you're doing some legwork to help them get a site. You're kind of in a partnership to help them get the site. There's the opportunity to do that in path 2, but like the big scale changes, probably not. But what development does do is it allows you to start to utilize those public financing tools, and that you can leverage the value that's created by new development to start to fund those things. I think it might be difficult to fund some of those larger improvements just out of your town budget without that. And so I think attracting development helps to create more value that you can try to reinvest. In the partnership path, there's more opportunity because it's a bigger partnership. There's more land to play with, and I think you're both coming to the table with things. I think the town's gonna have to come to the table with some support for the infrastructure in terms of allowing different financing tools to be used, and the developer's gonna have to come to the table with and being able to incorporate a lot of these improvements that we've identified in their development plan.
And CDOT they have a calculation. If you were to devolve, they take, 30 years of maintenance and defer that and give you, it's a payout. So you could, ideally you take that money, or not ideally, but the process is that you would take that money and earmark it for future maintenance, but a lot of cities take it and upgrade their roads.
No, I think that's a good point. That focus on figuring out what the opportunities are related to the CDOT devolution is definitely a high priority. And that if you're headed down the town initiated path and we don't think we can get the big move in terms of creating the new Marshall, if you will, there might be a way to leverage the funding that you get out of the devolution to help with the road diet. And so that there might be a way to fund that. And that could be a major improvement that's done that helps even attract more interest to the site.
Okay.
I just had a small question about what's the distinction between for sale residential at downtown Superior and for rent residential at the marketplace? How is that distinction made?
Well, we're assuming that the Superior Marketplace would demand rental, whereas the downtown Superior probably has a mix of condos, townhouses, more ownership types as well as rental. I'm sure they'll have both.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to the downtown Superior developer has a lot of land and a lot of flexibility to play with product types and get different returns out of different portions of the land. Whereas for a developer in the marketplace, they're going to have a certain hurdle rate that they're going to hit, and the only product, they're probably going to have to be a pretty dense product to get that return required, and likely the only product that will be supportable, that'll support that high of a land cost would be the multifamily residential. And so that's why I think it's fine to say multifamily allowed in whatever zoning changes that you make. And be open to condos, but we just don't think from a market perspective that'll likely be a use that'll occur. And so I think we are just trying to create the distinction that the markets that you're trying to attract are going to be a little bit different in terms of the product.
Matt, is it fair to say that may vary kind of at the station versus on those edges? So ultimately, in the long term, if that park frontage we've talked about, someone wanted to, that I could see that being more, but that's longer term probably.
Yeah,
so at the transit station, it's really going to be driven by rental.
I think we're focused on sort of that center component and trying to get mixed use there. You're right that the stuff that lines the park, if that were to be residential, I think there's more opportunity to a broader range of products there. I still think that there are going to be barriers related to the return that they need from the redevelopment to where a townhome project might not pencil enough or be enough return for what they want. But who knows? It kind of depends. But that's more likely to occur, in my opinion, if you're in the partnership path and that there's more flexibility to change the whole site. I think that's less likely to occur on sort of a one-off or pad kind of situation. Any other questions?
I've got one other question.
Yeah.
It's not, I don't know this directly on this, but when we had our work session with the board, one of the things that got brought up was the meeting with the anchor tenants and, and conversation, I thought, now I could be totally wrong on this, but have we talked to Costco and to Target to see what they think about what we're proposing? And if not, when do we do that?
Yeah, we invited at least the contacts locally to come into the different meetings that we had. And I forget their participation. They were also involved.
I didn't think they participated.
Yeah.
And my concern is just we're going down this. This is, you started this meeting off saying we're relying on their revenue. And if we don't, it seems like we're not being good stewards with them if we don't at least, I know we invited them, but it seems like a couple people on the town board said they had contacts, I thought, with some of them. And it just seems like at some point before we go really far down this, we need to at least share this with them and say, does this make any sense to you? Or is this a bad thing? I don't know.
Sure. And I think when the ULI process occurred, I do remember that they were involved somewhat. At least the Costco general manager was involved in that process in my mind. I do know that Martin and Katie Press, your retail consultant, have had a lot of conversations with the Brixmore property owners. And I think also Katie has had conversations with, as much as she could, with the tenants, the operators. So they are aware of the process. And it might be good for Martin to provide an update on that, because I'm not as familiar, because I haven't been involved in those conversations. But I don't think they're completely unaware that this is going on. And I think generally, anything that we come up with, they have kind of been sharing with Brixmore, and they're going to understand really a fine-grained detail on the restrictions and covenant issues that relate to the parking lots and the performance of those stores. And so I think if there are any red flags in what we're developing, they're probably going to raise those because they know they're going to come up. And so I think I think we've done a fair amount of effort to bring them to the table and make them aware. And my opinion is I don't feel like they're completely unaware.
Yeah.
I don't think it hurts to do more. I think we should probably suggest that, but I wouldn't characterize it as they're not, they're kind of, this is an unknown thing to them.
Okay, because I think about if we're gonna tear up Marshall Road, redirect it and stuff, it's gonna impact Costco, getting to Costco somehow.
Yes.
In there.
Yeah.
And if I'm Costco, that's my main concern.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
So I just bring it up to say it should be something we think of as how do we alleviate that during that construction period and
Yeah.
be proactive on it versus reactive.
Yeah, I think it's worth maybe adding some language to that, and that should be spelled out. That should be a continuous conversation that goes on, whatever path that we go on.
Have you guys given any thought to, I guess, the nexus between the partnership action and the town-initiated action versus option 1 and option 2 for Cheney's design? It seems to me that option 1 would be probably more likely if it's all town-initiated, and option 2 would be more in play if we have a partnership. Is that accurate?
Yes, yeah. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but in that they have to align with each path. But I think you're right. I think that the Marshall Diet option more aligns with the town initiative effort because it's more feasible to kind of get that achieved. Whereas rerouting the road it would be more feasible, I think, in the partnership path.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
I guess question for you all in terms of, when we present this information to the board, is there adequate detail in terms of, there's so many graphics in the report. We didn't want to kind of go through all of that, but are there other specific things that you think would be helpful to include that are not, and this is pretty high level in terms of, what's in the report? Anything missing you think that would help?
I think looking at the graphics, are important, and for them to spend time looking at those, because we've been looking at this for a year and a half, and they're looking at it for the second or third time, right, in short meetings. So, I think spending some time on the options and how the roads reroute and is probably important. I know they're in the you didn't spend much time on them with us, but I think when we're presenting to the town board, that's going to be pretty important. And they're not going to, I don't know if they'll get, the Marshall Road Diet without
The cross section.
yeah, without some clear understanding of what we're accomplishing or why that's necessary. We've had you talk through traffic studies and everything else that indicate where the traffic goes, and that there really isn't a need for the width of that road. But again, they may have heard that once or twice. So okay. I think there's some key elements that we'll probably it'd be good to just spend a little time on so that they understand why we think this will work.
Okay, that's helpful. The other thing that struck me, and I'd be curious to get your take on as these guys were walking through it, is that, it might be worth spending a little bit of time just framing up why we carried forward 2 options. We talked about with you whether we ultimately go to one option, and the sense was, we want to keep them both on the table, and it really just kind of, a lot of it depends on this, and so I think we do need to do a better job of maybe just add a slide to kind of frame that up before we launch into those potentially. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think if there's, I think we'd all love to see the partnership side of this happen and the opportunity to do the infrastructure changes. But yeah, I think I agree that if we can't make that happen, having a fallback plan. And I can't quite tell if the fallback plan would let us move towards, if we started down the town initiated actions road of things, does that then preclude us from, moving to option 2, or, is it a pretty easy transition if we start down one path and start to develop interest and being clear about how that looks. So. Yeah.
All right, so I think that should probably be emphasized, because the trick with this is we have 2 different options and 2 different paths, and there's a lot of overlap. So it's almost trickier to distinguish the 2, but I think that there's also a lot of advantages to the overlaps that we have and with the opportunity to get started right away and not have to wait for somebody else to say that they're going to participate or not participate, and then, you know, just continue to move forward from there. I mean, I think that you can be nimble within the options that they've laid out for us, depending upon what happens on a lot of scales, but also whether or not we have a partner, so.
And then I also think understanding what we want from the town board, right? So if this does, you know, we have our work session, it goes forward, it gets on the agenda, what exactly are we wanting back, right? What are the next steps? Is it, yep, this looks great, we're not gonna go sign on the dotted line to, you know, make this happen, but there are gonna have to be some next steps that the planning commission is gonna have to start moving forward with, and, you know, whether it's, you know, some rezoning, whether it's, I mean, staff discussions with Brixmore, I mean, those, I think it's important that after this presentation, we tell the board what we think the next steps are that should happen, so.
Okay.
And I'd like to take I'm sorry, Bob.
No, go for it.
I'd just like to take a step back, because one of the things that came up for me during this was the option one, a Center Drive versus the Marshall Road diet. And I thought that I heard that if we're going to be looking at transit-oriented development as well, that it's having Marshall Road expanded, having that changed, and having the way that it looks in option one is necessary to make that transit-oriented development area possible. Because otherwise, I think what we're looking at is having this development, or wanting this development that's on an island, is what I heard, and being separated by Marshall Road away from the rest of the redevelopment.
Well, I think there's an opportunity to move from the transit station to the west across Marshall Road. It's really the focus. If you're not going to make the bigger change, the focus is trying to get development occur at the station, and then making Marshall more of a hospitable, you know, a more pleasant street to cross, to where you can start to get some synergy between both sides of the road. And if you can get some activity on the east side, moving towards redevelopment of some of that strip inline stuff along Center Drive and making that function better, and perhaps attracting some different uses on the west side of Marshall would be sort of the second phase of that. So I don't think it precludes you from it. Just the second option of rerouting Marshall just creates a bigger development site that's more centralized, and so it creates better path. And Cheney can talk to this too, but better development sites, more connectivity, a larger node for sort of a pedestrian-oriented environment. Whereas if you can't pull that off, you can still leverage it and create some development, but it doesn't quite have the same, you know, it's not as big, I guess.
And that doesn't necessarily have the same appeal if we're asking for a partnership and developers to come in and do that. Do we lose the appeal? And then does that area then hinge on the redevelopment of Marshall Road?
I think it's an attractive, being open to the movement of Marshall Road and taking over the ownership of it and providing that flexibility is an incentive to the major property owner to participate. And if you can't get them to, and at the end of the day, it's their property and they might be just completely happy with the way it is, at least you can start to proactively take steps to encourage, create more new, or introduce new uses and create more vitality, and then maybe bring them to the table. Like I said, I think if you were able to attract development near the BRT station, without a major partnership with Brixmore, and that occurred, and you started to create some activity, and then they changed their mind after seeing the success of that, I don't think it precludes you from going back to that option of moving Marshall Road. And so it's really the thought of where do we start, depending on whether or not we have a participating owner, really. And if they're not participating, then building from the east to the west is really the focus.
I had a comment on that, because I was looking at the expansion westward that you show on page 24 of the material. The sort of orangey brown areas are the ones I think you're talking about.
Yeah, right.
My concern about that when I looked at it was that an awful lot of the traffic going into Costco will go down Marshall Drive, make a left on Center, so it's going right through the middle of what's now going to be a residential area. And I wasn't sure that was a very positive, in fact, I thought that was a sort of rather negative aspect of this plan.
Although I think part of what we're trying to do is create more activities, so those are gonna be more urban residential properties than you're used to in other parts of town, so it's gonna be a slower street. And Jane can speak to this better than I can, but it's a different context than what you have today, for sure.
Yeah, even with the traffic analysis that we did, like today it sees, I think, around 5,000 cars a day, and it went up to maybe 6 or 7, and that is really nothing. It's still a main street environment. It's not, because there are other routes, that people take. It kind of disperses once you get past the Sycamore intersection. Traffic takes different patterns. So it's not all, 20,000 cars going past there.
And that's true even on weekends and
Yeah.
sort of evenings when, I mean, a lot of times, I mean, if you go across at 10 o'clock on a weekday morning, there's almost no traffic on
Right.
Marshall. If you go across at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of traffic on Marshall.
Yeah, I think there will still be those ebbs and flows, but what the traffic analysis told us is that it's nothing alarming. 5,000 to 7,000 cars a day is not that.
Okay. Thank you.
Questions on the marketplace stuff? Okay. All right. So shifting into original town, I think the main thing we've changed from our presentation to the board back in September is really kind of, all of the kind of context stuff we've kept the same. But we have just kind of tightened up where we landed in terms of the recommendation. So we'll talk about our follow-up meeting in October, the fact that we walked through, the ideas that are contained in the report and we're able to kind of address and get community feedback on those and confirm that, this is the direction that residents are interested in going for that area. We've broken apart kind of this overlay district, the standards and incentives concept from the ADUs, since that, there was a lot of discussion about that. That's that is a big change and something that would need to be, the community raised a lot of good questions, things they'd want to consider as part of that. So we wanted to pull that out separately. And then we also wanted to make sure, we kind of framed up some of those additional priorities and opportunities that came out of those conversations. So, so it's a fairly brief overview in terms of kind of where we landed.
I think this one, the board is going to be particularly sensitive to hearing that original town residents were heard and were informed. And I don't know if you have any of the data from the polling that you could include in here, but I know that that's been one of their primary concerns, just understanding that it really was their, buy-in on it.
Yep, yeah, no, we can definitely do that. We've got all of the full summaries that we'll include in the appendix, but we can pull in some snapshots from that to kind of reinforce that for sure. Okay.
How long do you think it would take to develop the standards?
Well, I think one of the reasons we've pulled the outline and kind of the details in there is, based on all the conversations we've had, you've gotten through a lot of the hard stuff in terms of, figuring out where you want to go, what needs to be in it. So the process of drafting standards from there is pretty quick, but you would also need to go back to the community and sort of say, all right, you had questions on, how lot coverage relates to an incentive on, we need to work through some of those, kind of considerations in terms of how that works. So that could take one meeting, it could, it's just a question of, how many times you need to kind of work with the community. But the process of actually drafting them is not a lengthy process based on where we are now and all the work that's gone in to date, so.
I mean, I ask because development has already started, as you're probably aware.
Yep.
I mean, there are 6 townhouses being built on William Street, and I think there are 6 or 7 vacant lots between 3rd Avenue and the creek, which are for sale at the moment.
And I do know, I mean, when we've gone through land use code in the past, that doesn't tend to be a quick process. I mean, the details, the things that get impacted by the changes that are recommended, you start digging into the code, and it's just, you just keep finding more and more things that you have to address.
Yeah, but, I mean,
but
Clarion just did this for Lafayette, and how long was that process, like 6 months?
6 months.
that would be awesome if we could pull it off in 6 months, yeah.
But that was from the beginning, all the process that we've done, so.
Okay,
So that's why I'm saying I think you've got a pretty good head start on kind of
Yeah.
where it looks like you want to go. So, other comments, questions on this or the report specifically that you would like us to address for the final draft version that we include for board packets? And we're happy to take those via email if that's easier too, if you just have kind of spot things you want to mention.
So is this all that'll be presented for Original Town then? I mean, they'll have the report?
They'll have the report and we'll have it up like we did now. We can jump in and kind of talk in more detail about any of those, but we were trying to keep it to the minimum we had for our last round. We added a little bit of detail, but we had a hard time getting through all of that, even though it was short at our last meeting with them. So happy to add more where you think we need to, if you think it's appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say.
I mean, I think if anything, under your recommendations, you have 4 bullet points on slide 42 or page 42. It might be just nice to, talk about kind of the goals of that overlay district a little bit more.
Sure.
I mean, I agree, you probably can't go into all the detail.
Yep.
But I think just highlighting for them kind of what that overlay district's trying to do.
Okay.
One, what can be achieved. I think that just to
Yeah.
remind folks that, and I think it's in here now, just where we started and why we had a concern about Original Town. And now we have direction that these things are supported and these are the tools that we can use to get there. And I think that, especially if if we're trying to get feedback from the board that, if we have a time frame that we can give them, that this would, at this point, probably only take 3 months or 4 months or whatever the case may be, to finish off, and we have the momentum now. Because this is something that the town, my understanding, and this is from people telling me that this is a process. When we first started, this is a process that the town has started, and we've gotten a lot further this time. So I'd hate for us to run out of steam,
Yeah.
so.
No, there's a lot that's been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I echo that generally. I mean, I think this plan is really well done. I think it communicates well, the intent of what we're trying to do. And I think that's kind of came to my urgency question is I would hate for the town board, in a month to say, this is great. And then, and I know that's not on you, that's all on us and staff to make sure that I think that we communicate, our desire for, this is just the beginning of all these things we need to do. This plan is not the end. So I think that's on us to do as well, but.
So would it make sense to have Bob kind of wrap up in terms of a next step slide that frames up kind of where you guys really see this heading in terms of wanting to go next with all of this? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm fine with that, with some assistance putting that together, but yeah, no, it's, I think that would make a lot of sense. I mean, the last work session we had, we just couldn't get through everything, right? There's just so much here. I'm a little nervous of trying to pull this off in another short work session with a lot of new board members that, haven't been involved in this. And I don't know if we should think about that, or whether we can either have a longer session, or whether it makes sense to split it up a little bit. The marketplace, I think there's some obvious direction, and that's probably easy, but there's a lot of content to cover. And then original town, there's less content to cover, but a lot of concerns. And so, I don't know.
I would let the board drive that. I think the report itself, obviously they'll get that ahead of time. And maybe this is something we give them, not in the packet on the Friday before, but we give them 2 weeks ahead of time so that they can kind of take some time to digest it. And then if they feel like, this isn't clear, they can ask for more time. I don't want to presume that they need a ton of time. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the problem was that the last one is the time was up, and you could just tell there was a lot of pent-up questions and concerns. Yeah.
I personally would like to do it in 2 sessions rather than one. I think switching from, the Superior Marketplace concept is so different from the original town concept. And I think trying to put them together and switch gears doesn't really do justice to either of them.
Unless we had allocated time and stuck to it, right? That could work if it was maybe a slightly longer work session, if people were up for it, starting at 5 or 5:30, and not at 6, and truly splitting it. But the problem is that meeting's not well managed. The next thing you know, you're off. And maybe we play it by ear.
That's what I was going to suggest. I would say that, lay it out with original town plan first, because it is the shorter one. It may drive a lot of questions, but that's the one that's the most urgent. Like tonight, going in the direction that we did, we went through the majority of the content first. But if you flip that, go in that direction, and then also kind of almost develop a timeline or a time schedule, and say, to get through these 2 this evening, we've already maxed out our time, and we'd really like to push it, I don't know, but I would definitely say that the original town discuss first.
You can also preface the whole conversation just saying that, we're going to start at a high level. We recognize that we have 3 new trustees. If we need to have a deeper conversation about this, we have all of this background information, and we're happy to get into it all. But, and just ask for their feedback, in terms of what they feel like they need more information on. But maybe the whole thing is just let us give our presentation, and then if we need more time, we're happy to schedule another work session with you. But also, you don't want it to be 2 months out, or whatever.
Well, yeah,
There's a sense of urgency,
I've got that worry too, that if we don't have it, and I don't know if we can get two work sessions on the calendar back to back, in case they're needed, right?
I can try.
All you can do is you can ask, right?
Yeah.
That says we schedule one, and if need be, there's
there just happens
potentially
to be a
second
lot
one.
always at the beginning of the year, so I don't know what it looks like right now, but I can check. So.
Okay.
And Stephen, I assume there's a full agenda that evening for the main meeting.
I haven't looked past next week, unfortunately, but yeah,
There
I'll
always
check
seems
on
to be
that
a
too.
full agenda. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Reese that the original town, I feel like, should be first. Let's swap the order, just because I think that is the overall priority. And then if we get kind of a yes, thumbs up on that, we can continue developing the next steps on that while we get them updated on the marketplace. I think more as time allows. So I think that's probably a good strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think, and to add to that is that if we get approval, it's a lot of work to do over a 3-month period, 4-month. We would try to work through it as quickly as possible, but to have both of them, if the board all of a sudden said, you know what, you're right, both of them are important, just go. The amount of time and effort, I feel like if we're working on both of them at the same time, then we kind of lose focus on one of them. So I think from a priority standpoint, original town is probably.
Well, the majority of the work for the planning commission is going to be, I think, with the original town. I think a lot of communication has to happen on the marketplace, and staffed RTD, staffed Brixmor. I mean, there's just the planning that has to go into that before we even start doing anything in any detail is down the road a bit. So maybe we just really plan on doing Original Town at that meeting, and if time allows, we do the marketplace, otherwise we schedule that in the next work session.
So I'm gonna echo some concerns that I've heard. I think if we do that, we start to lose momentum in this, and we don't want to lose that momentum going forward. I do understand that there's gonna be a lot of emotion tied to, discussions around Original Town and planning for that. However, I think we need to limit that time, and accomplish really, both if we can in the time that we have allotted. You know, I believe that the marketplace is gonna be more, no pun intended, but more concrete in terms of what needs to be presented there and what needs to be shared. I think we can get through that. I think you've done a great job in outlining that and, you know, bringing it to a point where a decision actually needs to be made there. I agree with Commissioner Reese as well. However, I do want to continue to push forward on both aspects of this plan.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with that. It's just, I mean, these both have to move forward quickly. That's why if we were gonna do back-to-back work sessions, looking at the schedule, if it needed to extend into another work session, it happens quickly. I wouldn't want it to sit out another month until we got back to the marketplace. I agree. And maybe it is just about moderating the meeting and getting expectations set and really staying on them to come to conclusion. So,
Okay.
and I can try to help with that as well. Just see, I'll take some bullets. I don't mind.
Nice job, everybody.
This is really
Thank you,
well.
guys.
This is
Thanks
very
for
well
all your
done.
time.
Thank you. Thank you.
We also have our work plan for 2019 to discuss, so that I think
Okay.
will probably dovetail into what you guys are thinking about might come out of this. And so, but I'll follow up as soon as I have a better idea on those meetings, and my apologies for not looking ahead further than next week. So, I'm sorry.
No worries. So we at a point where we let them go and we can
Yeah,
move
unless
in.
you guys
We're
have any
gonna
more
have to discuss
questions.
this and make our recommendation, correct?
Yeah, we
But
can, yeah, that's separate from them being here,
Yeah, I
unless
don't
you guys are curious. You're more than welcome to leave. My only question, I guess, then it was more about the marketplace that I meant to ask was, it seems like ownership beyond Marshall Road is important, and the town has an opportunity to, you know, look into obtaining the right-of-way for Fifth and Central in order to have more control. And I don't know whether or not that's emphasized or needs to be a little bit more emphasized, just because I think that's a great opportunity. So,
We did add some language in there
Okay.
based on your comments, Stephen.
Okay.
Maybe it's not in the, we can look at where it is.
it may have been in that presentation, and I just missed it, or,
We didn't talk about it a
Right,
lot
right, right.
tonight,
So,
so. yeah,
okay.
But it's definitely in there.
because I think that a couple of the key things are, I think we've made a couple of, or several, you know, really big strides compared to the ULI study. And I want to make sure that that's distinguished from, you know, what the board has in mind, as to what our outcomes are. And I just think that, that's kind of one of the big ones, is getting, if we have control over those roads, we have a much better opportunity to make those connectivity enhancements, and then potentially getting the plausification and stuff like that. And I think it's all in there. I just don't know. It's certainly all in here. I just don't know what's in the presentation
Okay.
yet, because it was a quick synopsis, so.
Okay.
And Commissioner Ritchie brought up, can we get this to the board in advance of a packet?
It's
Can that
pretty
be done?
baked
Is
at
that-
this point, yeah, so we can get it to them
Okay.
early. It's more of a policy question at this point. We typically get it to them the Tuesday before their meeting, so they have nearly a week to look at it. But if it's all ready, I don't know why
If
we
it's
couldn't get
ready
it to them
and-
sooner, yeah.
Yeah,
maybe just a request from the planning commission that the presentation is at a higher level, the detail is in this document, and.
Right, and if we're make a recommendation, we may want to come with like just a memo too, that just kind of tease it up for them.
Sure.
Like in terms of what the recommendations are and and that's where you can kind of get them thinking about what you want to get out of the work session and how you've structured it and, that type of thing, so.
Okay.
All right, thank you guys so
All
much.
right,
Thank you.
guys.
Okay.
All right, do I adjourn the work session? Is that-
Yes, and then give me just a minute so I can
Okay.
change over here.
All right, so our work session's adjourned.
I was gonna bring it up because I was just thinking of this whole plan, the two different Marshall roads, right? And that's gonna be it's over, like, northbound Marshall being one way and then Fifth, and then the other, whatever would be on the other side being your Peters coming back.
Best practice, just kind of moving away from the one, two,
Is that just, like, when you're trying to cross the street?